Hello, everybody. Today, I want to talk to you about something that affects every area of life. And most people cannot escape their life without having some of it. It's going to affect your business, it's going to affect your relationships, it's going to affect your level of happiness. And there's a lot of misconception out there about what I'm going to talk about today. People are using it as an excuse for a lot of things. And so, what am I talking about? Today, I'm going to be talking about trauma. I want to talk to you about how it affects how you show up in the world, in your business, in your relationships. I want to talk to you about how it affects how you feel about yourself and how it affects you really being who you are, which is what being the wolf is all about. And you all know that it is my belief that the more people we have operating from the true essence of who we are, that our ecosystem, our world will thrive. And one of the things that trauma does is it causes a lot of people to hide aspects of who they are, to shut down possibility for themselves, and to move in this way where they're trying to prevent bad things from happening as opposed to creating good things from happening. And that distinction might not seem like such a big distinction, but let's just look at it this way. If you're a skier and you're skiing down a mountain that has a lot of trees, you obviously do not want to hit the tree. And so, what they tell you to do is they tell you to focus on the path. And by staying on what you want to create, which is a nice smooth path, so you focus on the path, the smooth path, what is the smooth route to go? That is what you create. If you focus on the trees, you will hit a tree. To be able to have a life of freedom, to have a life of fun, to be able to actually create the things that you want in your life, in your business, your relationships, and your health, you have to focus on what it is you want, not on what you don't want. And what trauma does is it causes most people to focus on what they don't want. And so, why is that? Obviously, logically, it makes sense because you don't want it to ever happen again. So, if you have something really bad happen that's very traumatic, and also it could be smaller things that for whatever reason really impacted you. You know, people think about trauma as these really big things, but it could be something so simple as getting lost in the grocery store when you're 3 years old. It's a very overwhelming experience for a 3-year-old. And so it makes sense that we would logically want to prevent those things from happening again. But I want to talk to you about why it sets us up to do that. Because obviously, there are some people who experience a major, quote, traumatic event and they're just fine. And other people, they have PTSD or they have these trauma responses, right? And trauma response is such a big buzzword. Oh, perfectionism is a trauma response. Oh, this is a trauma response. You see it all over the internet, memes, and oh, they triggered my trauma. And it's great that there's awareness to trauma. And it's also like with anything, sometimes a pendulum swing where it's becoming an excuse for not taking responsibility for your life. And so I want to talk to you about how you can take responsibility for your life and responsibility for the things that you have experienced in your life. And I don't mean that you're responsible for the traumatic things that happened to you, but how you can move forward. So, one of the things about the Be the Wolf story is the wolves were eradicated in the early part of the century. and they did it to make the park safe. But over time, it collapsed the ecosystem. And so when they introduced the wolves back into the park in the mid 90s, the wolves did not act as if they were going to be hunted and eradicated again. They just acted as if that past had never happened. And because of that, they were able to be fully themselves and do what wolves do. And as a result, the ecosystem began to recalibrate, rebalance, and began to thrive again. And so, what happens with us humans when we have trauma is we act as if that thing is going to happen again. And so, we're trying to prevent it. And so, the truth about trauma, why it actually affects the way that you move through the world, is because of what trauma actually is. And I think most people don't really understand what trauma truly is. So I want to define it for you here. Trauma is, or trauma happens when you have not fully processed the emotions from an event. So if you were that little kid that was overwhelmed at the grocery store and you were overwhelmed with fear, thinking, oh my God, I'm all on my own, I'm going to die, I don't know how to take care of myself, like you were overwhelmed with that panic and you weren't able to fully process that because maybe you didn't have the cognitive understanding that you were actually okay. You didn't have the resources at the time to process those emotions fully, then it registers to your nervous system as trauma. This is an important distinction. I'm talking about the emotions from the very moment of the event, not the emotions that come from what you made it mean. So you might make it mean, like you're lost in the grocery store. You might make it mean my parents left me. They don't love me. I'm unlovable. And those will bring up some other emotions. But those emotions from the meaning that you made of it, those emotions are not the actual emotions that need to process in order to clear the trauma from your nervous system. And so when you have these unprocessed emotions locked in your nervous system, your subconscious thinks that you don't have the resources to handle the situation, because if you did, you would have processed those emotions. So for instance, right now, if I got lost in a grocery store, it wouldn't elicit any emotion from me. I wouldn't be freaking out about how I'm in danger. I would just be like, oh, I'm lost. And I would keep walking and figure it out, because now I have the resources to do that. But as a 3-year-old, I might not have had the resources. And so that fear comes up. And so your subconscious wants to prevent you from ever having that experience again. So let's just say that's your trauma. You got lost in the grocery store, you were overwhelmed with fear, and it didn't fully process. So now you move through life doing everything you can to make sure that people don't leave you. And you're hanging on to relationships too long because maybe one of those meanings you made was that you think you're unlovable. And because of that, you're moving through life trying to prevent it from ever happening again, because you don't really want to tap that unprocessed emotion because your nervous system thinks that you're not capable of handling that. So what ends up happening is that the meanings you've made of those unprocessed emotional events, so those traumatic events, end up running how you respond and how you relate to life. And so this is why trauma often runs people's lives, because you made up a story about a traumatic event. You made up a story of what it meant. Oh, I must be unlovable. Oh, nobody likes me. Oh, I'm not capable. I'm not smart. I am weak. All of these stories, these meanings that you made up of the event now are running your life. You decided it at that moment of trauma, and now you're living your life as if that is true. Like if the wolves had lived their life as if people were out to get them, they would not have survived. They would not have been able to thrive in a way that it could help to rebalance the ecosystem. But we as humans, we're operating from these stories that we made up about our trauma. So if you had, like, I was almost kidnapped 3 times in my life, and I had a story in my mind that people were out to get me. So how did this show up in my life? Well, when good opportunities came to my way, I was always thinking like, "Oh, how are these people trying to screw me over? How are these people trying to get over on me? What is the angle? What is their motive?" And I was always questioning and wondering what people were up to. And yeah, of course, some people are up to nefarious things, but I'll tell you what, I I turned away so many people who were not up to nefarious things. And the funny part of it is that I ended up connecting with more of the people who were up to nefarious things. And this is a frequency thing because I was operating from fear and they were operating from this low frequency. We were a match. So what ends up happening when you have this fear and you're operating from this, I need to prevent it, or I have these negative stories about what my trauma meant to me, we end up attracting more of the same stuff, skiing down the mountain, and we don't want to hit the trees, but we're focused on the trees, we're going to hit the trees. If we're skiing down the mountain and we stay on the path of what we want to create, we will create more of the good things. So if I had been, instead of running this background story of people are out to get me, if I had been running the background story of what I was trying to create, I would have been able to see and access those opportunities that were really good, that would have actually propelled me, instead of going for the opportunities that weren't going to take me anywhere, because I would have been paying attention to something different. When you experience trauma, you tend to look at everything through the lens of what you don't want. When you look at the world through the lens of what you don't want, when people ask you, what is it that you want out of life? And you can tell them, well, I can tell you what I don't want. It's a sign that you have made up negative meanings, probably because of some sort of trauma, some sort of unprocessed emotion. And what happens is these negative meanings, I'm unlovable, I'm weak, I'm stupid, all of these negative meanings that you make up as a result of some emotional experience, they end up eliciting new emotions that are not actually your traumatic emotions. They're these emotions of shame, of guilt, of anger. So lower level emotions, but not that base level fear emotion that the trauma actually created. And so when you do this and you have these stories and you run these stories through your head, you are It's like what's the word? An amplifier. Every time you run a story, oh, I'm not good enough, you run that story through your head, it elicits a little pop of shame, a little pop of guilt, a little pop of anger, a little pop of frustration. And then you're vibing in these frequencies of negative emotions. And so you're going to attract other people and other things that are vibing in those negative emotions. Your business, you're going to attract opportunities that vibe at that frequency. Like attracts like when it comes to energy. How do we actually get to a place where we can be free of it? Where we're no longer making up those stories, where we're no longer running away from that unprocessed emotion. So, the first thing you have to do is you have to understand that those stories are just stories. They're meanings that you made of something. And though you may not be able to see it right now, you may not be able to access it right now, but there is another meaning, another perspective that will give you more emotional freedom. I did make up the story that people were out to get me because of my experiences. I decided that was true. But here's the truth. I was almost kidnapped 3 times. Yes, that is a true statement. And I wasn't almost kidnapped 20 times. I wasn't almost kidnapped 50 times. Every single one of my experiences in my life were not about people coming after me. And when in situations where people did actually try and screw me over, I was definitely looking for it. There's another perspective of those were just some things that happened. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And how amazing is it that as a little kid, I broke free? I was able to escape those situations. How cool is that? So it's not that I'm not capable. I'm very capable of taking care of myself. That little kid who was 6, 7 years old, 8 years old when that stuff was happening was so aware that they were able to get away. Like, how cool is that? So instead of it like, oh God, people are out to get me, like, how cool is it that I escaped these crazy situations? That is really cool. So that's another perspective. But here's the place of how you get to that other perspective is you have to accept that place of where you made up the stories and what actually happened. People tried to come after me when I was little. That's a fact. I didn't need to make up the meaning that people are out to get me. It's just a thing that happened. I can make up a meaning just as easily that it's so cool that I got away. And when I can accept that people are not out to get me, when I can really get to this place of acceptance, that that is the story that I made up, that creates a bridge. So to get to that place of how cool is it, what I had to do is actually dive into that fear, unprocessed emotion that was there at the beginning. And once I got to that emotion and was able to be there and accept it, accept that I was scared, accept that it's okay that I had that emotion, stop running from that emotion and just be in it enough so that I can process it. That acceptance of that initial fear is actually what gave me the opportunity to see the new perspective. Because what happens when you have these unprocessed emotions is you are running from the unprocessed emotion. And to do that, to create a barrier so that you don't get to that unprocessed emotion, you create these stories like people are out to get me. So if I come into this, people are out to get me, and I can deal with that fear, which is a fear that I can manage, versus that deeper fear of what the fear was in the actual event, then I wouldn't have to deal with that deeper fear. I wouldn't have to accept it. And so the longer you run those negative stories about what your trauma meant, the further away you are from actually dealing with and accepting that root fear that happened at the time of the event. And once you accept that, you allow yourself to feel it and you accept it, then you get that bridge to the healing. Then you can see the next stage of experience. I used to think that the sign that my trauma was healed was that I could talk about it without being emotional. But what I realized is that at that point I had dealt with a lot of the stories I made up as a result of the trauma. And so I could talk about it without being emotional, but I still hadn't gotten to that root emotion and dealt with that. That was what one could say the first stage of healing, being able to talk about it without being overly emotional. And then eventually I got to this place where it felt like it didn't really matter that I had that experience. It felt really neutral. And that's in that place of acceptance. Like once you actually deal with that root unprocessed emotion, then you get to that place of acceptance. And then it feels neutral. It's like a movie. It's like, oh, I ate dinner last night. It has the same emotional charge, but the richness of the experience is much deeper, right? It's not just like you ate dinner. It's like this big experience. There's richness to it, but it feels very neutral. And it's something that happened to you, but it doesn't feel vulnerable to talk about anymore because that deep root emotion is processed. And then when you can get to that third aspect where you can see it from a positive perspective, that's when it becomes a gift. Like how cool and how amazing is my 6-year-old self that they escaped these crazy situations. Like so capable. And so here's the thing, why it's important to heal that trauma, what it creates in your life. First and foremost, you have to understand that the life you are living today is a result of all the decisions you have made. And when you're making decisions from this prevention place, you tend to second guess and you tend to worry because you're looking at it from all these different angles of what you need to prevent instead of focusing on what you create. So healing your trauma allows your business decisions to become more easy. That indecision, bye-bye. And you're able to stick to things. And the shiny object syndrome dampens, softens. You're also able to pivot when things are not working without feeling like you've got to hang on to things for dear life. And you lose the fear of trying new things. Being able to take a risk becomes easier. You can start to work on those long-term goals instead of being mired in the day-to-day. A lot of people who've experienced a lot of trauma are mired in the day-to-day. They can't seem to get away from that and work on those long-term ideas that they have in their head. They're just stuck in the day-to-day. We're putting out fires all day long. You also begin to trust yourself, and you trust that if you make the wrong choice, that you can handle it. You get more access to creative problem solving. And so just looking at that from a business aspect, being able to problem solve in a creative way where you're not just setting yourself up for a similar problem down the line is a huge deal if you're wanting to grow and scale a business. It affects your abundance and your money mindset. You begin to start to see possibility. You can focus on the things that are going right instead of the things that are going wrong. You notice the good things instead of the bad. And you can work with what you have instead of always being focused on all this crap that you don't have, that you think you need. So you stop spending money on shit that you don't need. Relationships, you're able to have those difficult conversations with ease without being all awkward and like, ugh. And your connection gets deeper because you're not subconsciously at this defensive mode. And your ability to create, right, in relationship, when you have a relationship, you want it to be this creation, this magical, beautiful thing that blossoms and blooms, instead of what a lot of people are in, which is these relationships that are like give and take, constant back and forth. Oh, if you get it, I don't get it. It's like this win-lose situation that people are operating in all of the time. So taking the time to deal with your trauma, finding somebody who can help you process those deep level emotions is really important. There are a lot of great therapists out there, and a lot of therapists who will just have you talking about the same shit over and over and over again, which just reinforces those negative stories that you're telling yourself. Oftentimes, the more we tell our traumatic stories, we just relive those emotions and those meanings and the emotions from those meanings over and over and over again. And we're making that trauma deeper instead of actually working with somebody who knows how to get to those root cause emotions and help you be able to process them. And there's lots of different ways out there. And you will listen to yourself, hopefully. Be the Wolf is all about really connecting to the essence of who you are, and there's a path for you. So if you are really dedicated to healing and clearing your trauma, there is a path for you. Listen, pay attention, and focus on what your life would be like if the trauma were not running it. Focus on the freedom. Do what you can to live from that space and make your decisions about healing your trauma from that place. Don't go down some rabbit hole of some sales funnel of somebody telling you how they can heal you and set you free from trauma when you're all in a state of fear. Make that decision from a place of feeling expansive, from a place of freedom, from a place of what you want to create. So if you have to ride a motorcycle to feel free, then do that and think about, is this the right decision for me to work with XYZ person in order to heal my trauma? Because there's a lot of things out there that's just going to perpetuate the same stories. So you want to make sure that whoever you choose to work with, whether you work with somebody like me or you work with a therapist, you want to step into it with that feeling of freedom so that you can actually distinguish whether that person is going to help you be able to get there. Because if you're operating from trauma, you're not operating from freedom all the time, but there are moments when you can access it. And when you can access it, that's the place you want to make that decision from, not from the place of being scared and freaked out in a trauma response. So I hope this was useful. And I know I went deep on some stuff and probably showed you some perspective about trauma that you haven't seen before. Feel free to comment, feel free to send me an email, do all of the things. I want to know, and I want to know that this was useful for you. It's a big deal, this trauma stuff, and there's a lot of bullshit out there. I spent years and years and years decades and decades and decades and thousands of dollars trying to break free from this stuff. And I work with people to shorten that journey. And it does a lot of things. It helps your business, it helps your relationships, all of those things. But essentially, it helps you reclaim the freedom of you. What would your life be like if you didn't have to operate from fear, didn't have to operate from this place of prevention of these negative stories that you've made up about yourself because of some emotional thing that happened? And some of that stuff happens repetitively, like, right, there's the CPTSD stuff where it's just repetitive instances that are just reinforcing, reinforcing, reinforcing. And again, this is why it's so important to make sure that you're not making choices that reinforce those negative stories, that you're not working with people who will help you to reinforce those negative stories. You want to break free from them. Well, maybe you don't. If you don't, that's okay too. But I hope for you to break free from them so that you can really operate from the freedom of you, so that you can be who you are, so that you can do the things that make you happy. And as a result, that overflow gives to the rest of us in a beautiful and powerful way. So thank you again. Tell me your stories, reach out. I want to hear from you. And remember, when you reclaim the freedom of you, humanity evolves. We'll see you next time on Be the Wolf. Bye, everyone.